Hi, everyone. Welcome to Organic Science. Curated by the Organic Guy and aided by AI, Organic Science shares hidden, hard-to-digest organic and sustainable farming research as bite-sized, brain-friendly insights you can use daily. Today, the science says, you are less likely to be obese if you eat organic foods.
That's quite a statement, and definitely one worth digging into. In this deep dive, we're going to explore the research behind that idea.
Right.
We've looked at a pretty recent comprehensive analysis. It pulled together multiple studies looking at that potential link between, choosing organic foods and your risk of obesity.
And it's timely, isn't it? With obesity being such a huge issue and so much more interest in organic options these days.
Exactly. Understanding if there is a connection could be really valuable for you, the listener. So our aim here is to break down this research, pull out the key insights, and make it, well, clear and engaging.
Okay, let's unpack it. We all know obesity is a massive global health problem,
Huge.
affecting millions, leading to serious stuff, heart disease, diabetes, lower quality of life, you name it.
And the usual advice is, reduce calories, eat more fruits and vegetables, exercise more. Standard stuff.
But this research introduces a slightly different angle, doesn't it? That what we eat, specifically organic versus conventional, might play a role too.
It does. And what's really interesting is how the rise of organic food seems to parallel, in some ways, the rise in obesity rates over the last few decades.
I hadn't quite thought of it like that.
Yeah, especially in Western countries, you see organic food getting more and more popular. Surveys back this up, like one in 2016 found most Americans had bought organic recently. Many eat it regularly.
And the market growth reflects that.
Oh, absolutely. Globally, sales just exploded in the 21st century. We're talking like from around $18 billion in 2000 up to over $100 billion in 2019.
Wow. So what's driving that? Is it just this feeling that conventional food might have, well, unwanted extras?
That's a big part of it, I think. There's this underlying belief or maybe concern that conventional foods might contain chemical residues, pesticides, for example, and that these could negatively impact health.
Potentially even messing with metabolism or hormones, leading to weight gain.
That's the theory some people hold, yeah. And organic farming, of course, aims to minimize exposure to those synthetic chemicals.
Right. Less synthetic stuff.
Exactly. And this whole context sets the stage for the specific research we looked at, this systematic review and meta-analysis.
Okay, meta-analysis. So pulling together lots of studies.
Precisely. Think of it as a study of studies. They gather all the relevant, high-quality research on a topic to see what the overall evidence points towards.
And here, the topic was specifically organic food and obesity risk.
Yes. They wanted to get a clearer picture of that association. They did a really thorough search across the big scientific databases, PubMed, Web of Science, Embase, looking for studies up to November 2021.
So what were the criteria? What kind of studies made the cut?
They were quite specific. They looked for observational studies, so studies watching people's habits, not experiments involving healthy adults.
Okay.
The key was that the studies had to measure organic food consumption as the exposure and obesity as the outcome.
And they needed specific stats.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They needed things like odds ratios or relative risks with confidence intervals. Those numbers let you actually compare the obesity odds between organic eaters and conventional eaters.
Makes sense. So after sifting through everything, how many studies actually fit?
Well, in the end, they landed on 4 studies that met all those criteria.
Only 4.
4, but they were substantial. Altogether, they included data from over 104,000 healthy people.
Wow, okay. That's a big sample.
It is. And within that group, you had over 39,000 identified as regular organic food consumers and just over 1,600 cases of obesity reported across the studies.
Right, so a decent amount of data to analyze. What was the main finding when they crunched those numbers?
The headline finding was pretty clear, actually. The meta-analysis showed that eating organic food was associated with a statistically significant lower probability of obesity.
Lower probability. How much lower?
When they pooled all the data, the overall odds ratio came out at 0.89.
0.89. What does that mean in plain English?
It means the odds of being obese were lower for the organic group. The 95% confidence interval was 0.80 to 0.97, and the result was statistically significant. So basically, it translates to roughly an 11% lower risk of obesity for organic food consumers compared to those eating mainly conventional food.
An 11% reduction. That sounds... Well, it sounds noticeable.
It is. It might seem modest maybe as a percentage, but think about it population-wide. If that link holds true, Even an 11% reduction could have a pretty significant impact on public health overall.
Yeah, good point. But you mentioned something earlier. Heterogeneity.
Yep.
Sounded like there were differences between the studies.
Ah, yes, good catch. Heterogeneity. It's a bit of scientific jargon, basically meaning the results weren't perfectly consistent across all 4 studies.
Okay.
They calculated a statistic called I-squared, which was 77.5%, that's quite high, and it signals that there was considerable variation between the individual study results. It tells us we need to dig a bit deeper to understand why they might differ.
So did they dig deeper? Did they look at subgroups or anything?
They did. They performed subgroup analyses. One interesting thing they found was that the link between organic food and lower obesity risk seemed stronger in the cohort studies.
Cohort studies. Those are the ones that follow people over time, right?
Exactly. Compared to cross-sectional studies, which are just like a snapshot at one point in time, the cohort studies showed a more pronounced reduction in risk, an odds ratio of 0.78.
Interesting. Any other differences?
They also noted some variation based on where the study took place and the sample size, which again points to that heterogeneity.
Okay, so we have this link, maybe stronger in certain study types. Now for the big question, why? Why might choosing organic food be linked to a lower risk of obesity? What did the researchers think?
Well, there are several potential explanations they discussed. One possibility is simply about overall diet quality. People choosing organic might also just eat more fruits and vegetables generally, which means more fiber, and that's known to help with weight management.
That makes sense. The healthy user effect? Kind of.
Sort of, yeah. Another major theory revolves around exposure, or rather reduced exposure, to things like synthetic pesticides, antibiotics, and maybe hormones used in conventional farming.
And the idea is these chemicals could potentially mess with our metabolism or endocrine system.
That's the hypothesis, that lower exposure in organic diets might positively influence BMI and metabolic health.
Okay, what else?
There's also the idea that organic foods might be more nutrient-dense, maybe higher levels of certain vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, anti-inflammatory compounds, though the evidence on that is still debated sometimes.
Uh-huh.
And even something as simple as size, some suggest certain organic produce might be smaller and thus have slightly lower sugar content per piece, though that's probably a minor factor.
And the lifestyle thing you mentioned.
Right. We can't discount the possibility that people actively seeking out organic food are often more health conscious overall. They might exercise more, smoke less, have other healthy habits that also contribute to lower obesity risk. It's likely a combination of factors.
So it's complicated. It might not just be the food itself, but a whole package deal associated with choosing organic.
It very well could be. And that brings us neatly to the limitations we need to consider with this kind of research.
Always important. What were the main ones here?
Well, a big one is the reliance on self-reported dietary data in the original studies. People aren't always great at accurately remembering or reporting exactly what they ate. That's called recall bias.
Right. I know I sometimes forget what I had for lunch yesterday.
Exactly. And also, because these were mostly observational studies, they can only show an association, not prove cause and effect. We see a link, but we can't definitively say eating organic causes the lower obesity risk based on this alone.
Like the umbrella and rain example you sometimes hear, correlation isn't causation.
Precisely. Another point is that most studies were done in Western countries, so the findings might not apply universally to populations with very different diets or lifestyles.
And the cost factor. Organic often costs more.
That's a huge potential confounder. Socioeconomic status. People who can afford organic food might also have better access to healthcare, safer environments to exercise, less stress factors that independently influence obesity risk. Researchers try to adjust for this, but it's hard to capture everything perfectly. That's residual confounding.
Got it. Anything else?
Just a couple more things. The term organic itself can mean different things, non-GMO, antibiotic-free, etc., and this review might not capture nuances across all those labels. And of course, obesity is super complex, influenced by genetics, environment, activity levels, sleep, many things beyond just organic versus conventional food.
True.
Oh, and one of the 4 studies included was actually a conference abstract, which typically undergoes less rigorous peer review than a full journal publication, so a small caveat there too.
Okay, so a fair few limitations to keep in mind. But on the flip side, were there strengths to this review? Reasons to still pay attention to the findings?
Definitely. The review did have significant strength. The search strategy they used was comprehensive, trying to find all relevant studies, including both cross-sectional and cohort designs, gives a broader picture. And as we said, the total sample size across the studies was very large, over 100,000 people. That gives the results more statistical weight.
And they tried to account for those confounding factors.
Yes, they used adjusted estimates where possible, trying to control for things like age, sex, lifestyle factors. And importantly, this appears to be one of the first and certainly one of the largest. They also did sensitivity analyses, basically checking if removing any single study dramatically changed the overall result, and found the findings were pretty robust.
Right. So bring this all together then. What's the main message for us, for the listener?
I think the key takeaway is that this high-level analysis does suggest a modest but statistically significant link between choosing organic foods and having a lower likelihood of being obese.
A modest link, but it's there in the data they analyzed.
Exactly. It adds another piece to the puzzle when we think about diet and health, specifically regarding organic options.
And what's next? Where does the research go from here?
Well, the researchers themselves highlight the need for more studies, particularly long-term, well-controlled studies. Ideally, randomized controlled trials, though those are tricky and expensive with diet. But we need studies that can more definitively establish causality and really pin down the mechanisms. Is it the pesticides, the nutrients, the lifestyle, or a mix?
So more digging needed.
For sure. But this research definitely offers a, let's say, promising avenue. It could potentially inform dietary guidelines or public health initiatives aimed at tackling obesity, which remains such a global challenge.
Okay, so to sum it all up for you listening, this deep dive into the science suggests there seems to be a connection, a link, between choosing organic foods and a slightly lower chance of obesity.
Based on this meta-analysis of observational studies.
Right. And while the research looks promising, we definitely need more investigation to really understand the ins and outs of this relationship.
Yeah.
It's likely complex.
So here's some food for thought for you. Considering the potential benefits hinted at in this research, what are your thoughts on the role organic food might play in a wider strategy for health, both for you personally and for public health? Is choosing organic something you might explore more in your own diet?